In our final session, looking at public theology, we explore theology redescribing the public processes of history. 21 years on from the Belfast Agreement, the past has not been dealt with, and politicians do not seem to have the capacity, maybe, or the will to deal with it. Sectarian politics may never find a way to deal with the most recent past, its violence, suffering, trauma, and bitter legacy. Each side accuses the other of rewriting history, while each side constantly rewrites history in the battle for the normative narrative. Politicians make poor historians, and thankfully, in relation to the events of 100 years ago, we have had academic and public historians curb the ideological excesses of politicians, and the decade of centenaries has to date neither had a simplistic nor a mono-narrative. There is no reason to believe that politicians will control or use for ideological party purposes the events of 1918-1922. Civil society has to take responsibility for dealing with the past, and if that means challenging elected representatives, then so be it. But civil society needs to be historically informed in relation to the complexity of the plural narratives of history. Public theology, if theology is to connect with the historical public needs, it needs not only to be aware and informed about the complex public processes of history, but be rooted in the theological resources that can be brought into the discourse on those public processes. Meanwhile, the world changes, while Northern Ireland remains locked in its long and more recent past. The changing world brings huge challenges as old certainties and an old order of things break down, and geopolitical shifts in power threaten the world we knew or know, and threaten peace on earth. Public theology has a public voice, and it is a theological voice. Theology, redescribing the public processes of history, has a model of theological analysis and action in the book of Isaiah. There is scholarly consensus that the book of Isaiah is not one book, but three which have been put together at some point in ancient Israel's history by an editor or a group of editors. The three parts of the book are each different in literary style. They reflect different historical circumstances and hold different theological perspectives. Chapters 1 to 39 belong to the 8th century BCE, and the context is the rise to power of the Assyrian Empire from 742 to 701 BCE. The second part of the book, chapters 40 to 55, dated about 540 BCE, are in the context of the demise of the Babylonian Empire and the geopolitical shift when the Persian Empire was bringing to an end the brutal and hated domination of Babylon. Chapters 56 to 66 are from around 520 BCE, when the Hebrew people in Babylonian exile have been allowed to return to their homeland by the more benign Emperor Cyrus, but without a free lunch. The returning exiles now engaged in the critical and difficult work of rebuilding and reshaping a broken and traumatized community. These three different parts have been brought together into one book, perhaps by later Isaiah scholars or an Isaianic tradition, and attention to the book of Isaiah has now turned to its theological framework. There are public historical processes reflected in the book, but in a theological framework, and it is the theology of Isaiah that offers a theological resource for dealing with the public historical processes of the past, present, and future. The book belongs to the prophetic tradition of ancient Israel, and prophecy is not foretelling or predicting the future. It may, in Brueggemann's words, be understood as a re-description of the public processes of history through which the purposes of Yahweh are given in human utterance. A key theological insight is that any decision taken by the Judean kings or these imperial overlords, and there are three powerful emperors at the forefront of the Isaiah text, everything is penultimate or provisional. The ultimate is the resolve and purpose of Yahweh, which relativizes everything, unsettles everything, and leaves open the possibility of newness. No king, political leader, or emperor is ultimate or has the last word. There is a dynamic, to human eyes often an ambiguous dynamic and purpose in history. Call it spirit or light, as the book of Isaiah does, that shapes, moves, and ultimately directs history. That is a theological claim, a faith claim, but without it, call it the alternative reign of God. Every emperor, king, and political power is absolute and ultimate. This is public theology, an ethic of resistance, and an ethic of hope and newness. The book of Isaiah offers a theology of redescribing the public processes of history. It is the theological shape of the book of Isaiah, and it looks like this. And the subheadings I've taken from Brueggemann's book, Hope Within History. First Isaiah is a critique of ideology. Isaiah chapters 1 to 39 are a relentless critique of a royal temple establishment in which the religious dimension has become a civic religion ideology without any self-criticism, and which uses religion or religion colludes with political self-interests. For Isaiah of Jerusalem, public order and life have benchmarks of righteousness and justice. These are key ethics and standards for Isaiah of Jerusalem, and they are about the quality of equity and humaneness to be practiced in community. These represent social practice and the norm for viable and healthy community life. Community life has fallen short of such ethical norms and has failed. The key issues are public and social. God looked for justice, but only found a community characterized by bloodshed. God looked for righteousness or right relations based on social justice, but only heard a cry, the cry of a people denied rights and equality and a place at the communal table, the cry of the dehumanized by injustice and inhumane policies. There is a violent, unjust, and inequitable community. It is a failed society that falls apart. It has been built on a religio-political and social ideology. First Isaiah is a critique of this ideology. It is the task of public theology. Second Isaiah articulates the embrace of pain. Isaiah chapters 40 to 55 name the weakness, the hurt, the vulnerability, failure, pain, displacement, and trauma experienced by the exiled community. This has been the exile experience for 50 years by the rivers of Babylon. Now historical experience is in transition, and Isaiah of Babylon will not allow denial or amnesia. The pain is publicly articulated, voiced, and articulated in the open. Then there is repeated use of the word translated as deliverance or liberation. Freedom is coming. History is turning. And the public processes are transformative. Comfort, comfort my people, says the Lord. We know the words from Handel's Messiah, though without a context. In Brueggemann's words, the power to liberate is not welcome unless there is adequate critique of ideology. It's not possible either without the public embrace of pain. When voiced, liberation is possible. Comfort is not a soother, but a power of life to stand on our feet again and return home to community and just social practice. There is a power of life, but the past has denied that. community has been deformed, and deformation has robbed people of their humanity. Second Isaiah articulates publicly the pain of the past and opens up the possibility of transformation and the power of life that comes from beyond empire and political and even religious systems. Public theology embraces public pain and opens up lives and imaginations to newness. Third Isaiah is about a practice of new social imagination. Isaiah chapters 56 to 66 are from the moment when exiles hear the edict of Cyrus, the new superpower leader, that allows the possibility to leave the rivers of Babylon and return to the homeland. Third Isaiah provides some powerful visions of hope and new community. Faith is less religious, certainly not in any narrow sense, or even religious establishment sense. It is openness to passionate social imagination, with the courage and freedom to practice life differently. These new community visions are rooted in justice and right relationships based on social justice. For Third Isaiah, there is no reshaping or rebuilding of community without the establishment of social justice. This is the basis of peace, shalom, and liberation. The left out are brought in. There is the redistribution of land, a just redistribution. In chapter 61, verses 17 to 25, the heart of Third Isaiah, the new community is a joyful community with new economics and a new spirituality of community, where there are the values of justice, compassion, inclusion, and the ethics of community, where injustice is unthinkable. We give attention to the tensions involved in reshaping and building a new community. Brueggemann states that Third Isaiah is concerned with internal communal life and tensions that must have arisen among the parties that we might label liberal and conservative. If we read chapter 56, we encounter a dispute about inclusion and exclusion in the community. We recognize that from our struggle to build a new community out of the failed past of Northern Ireland. It is the us and them in-out scenario. Will it be a community for all, or will one section of the community want to dominate and rule? Every attempt to rebuild a community will have tensions around inclusion and exclusion. Third Isaiah reflects, in Brueggemann's words, disputed negotiation in the community. There are other books in the Hebrew Bible that belong to this challenging period of community rebuilding. Ezra and Nehemiah are all for keeping the community pure and therefore an exclusive community. Third Isaiah, Ruth, Jonah are protest writings against exclusive race, ethnic or cultural communities. Their community vision is inclusive. The practice of a new social imagination leading to social policy and practice has to face the challenge of disputed negotiation. Third Isaiah visions a community where everyone is in an inclusion of equality and justice. The book of Isaiah offers a theological framework for redescribing the public processes of history. It is a public theology for dealing with the religio-political ideology that destroyed life in the past. It publicly names the pain and trauma that was caused by the injustice and violence of the past. And it is a public theology that offers the practice of new social imagination. This is what public theology does with the historical public, and it opens up liberation, new community, and transformation. There is one question for group discussion. Using this theological resource from the book of Isaiah, what response would public theology make to dealing with Northern Ireland's past and the building of a new present and a new future?